Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final day of the IIE PEER Forum 2021. The title of our session today is Higher Education Initiatives in Asia Pacific, and my name is Jonathan Lembright, and I'll be your moderator. I'm the Regional Director for IIE's Southeast Asia operations. I'm based here in Bangkok, and I just want to thank everyone for joining this final session, and I'm very excited for the discussion ahead and for the panelists that are joining us today, and for you and the audience and the questions that I know you'll have in looking at this very interesting topic and timely issue. I did want to provide a bit of background. So for those who might be joining this session for the first time, education in emergencies is one of the most underfunded sectors in humanitarian aid, with higher education often considered a luxury, unfortunately. We don't see it that way. And through our student emergency initiatives, which includes a platform for education in emergencies response, or PEER, IIE provides students who have been uprooted from home through no fault of their own with an opportunity to complete their higher education as a way to foster economic development, improve public health, and build safer communities in crisis-ridden countries and regions of the world. So the goal for today is to build on this foundation and explore a wide variety of effective engagements within the region with displaced students and beyond simply what IIE does, but really want to hear from a diverse set of practitioners and those who are engaged with this topic. And just to give you a bit of a preview of how we'll spend our 90 minutes together is that we will begin with a student story. So a story of displacement from a student who's along the Thai-Myanmar border. She'll share that as a way to set the context for today's discussion. And then we'll have what I think is a very interesting panel discussion. And we'll have a time for some moderated questions, but then also we'll have a time for question and answer from the audience. So please, as noted earlier, if you have questions, we definitely want to hear those. Feel free to chat those in the box in Zoom as they come to you so we can note those, or you can always write them down on a piece of paper and you can send those in towards the end of our session. So we look forward to that. We'll have each of the speakers will certainly provide an introduction when they talk, but I also just want to provide a little bit of a preview on who is with us today. So we have Ching Sian, who's with the Shade Tree Foundation in Mae Sot on the Thai-Myanmar border. She's also a student at Australia Catholic University, and she's finishing her certificate program in the process of doing that now. She'll share with us at the beginning. And we have our first panelist will be Dr. Barney Glover, who is the Vice-Chancellor and President of Western Sydney University. Our second panelist is Gardi, who is the CEO and founder of Empower, and also the co-founder of the Center for Asia Pacific Refugee Studies at the University of Auckland, a very innovative center, first of its kind. We're excited to have Rez and Barney with us. And then we are very excited to have our third panelist, Greg Tyrosvoutis, who is the co-founder and director of TeacherFOCUS Myanmar. And he'll share with us from Mae Sot as well, from the Thai-Myanmar border area. And with that, we'll transition into our opening story from Miss Zam. And it's really, I think it's important to help set the stage for our discussion and ground our discussion in her personal experience as a displaced student. A little bit of background before she shares with us is that Zam is ethnic Chin from Myanmar, who came with her family to Umpiam refugee camp on the Thai-Myanmar border as a child and finished high school in the camp. She then sought out education opportunities and enrolled in Australia Catholic University's Thai-Burma program in Mae Sot. And then while studying, she has also been working with the Shade Tree Foundation, an NGO that advocates for the migrant community in Mae Sot. And then Zam's future plans are to study public health at Mae Fah Luang University in Chiang Rai, Thailand. And so with that, I'd like to ask Zam to go ahead and share with us. You can turn your camera on. And I'll turn it over to you at this point. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. So thank you so much for having me today, and I'm very glad to be here as well. My name is Ching, and I'm 22 years old, and I'm the middle one in my seven siblings. So we have quite a lot of siblings, and we are originally from Namhanot village, Chin State, Western Myanmar, where even today there is no hospital or clinic, and people have to walk up to 2 days to assist basic healthcare. And even my older brother, who had fever, died en route when my father tried desperately to get him to the clinic on an ox cart. And still today, even today, my parents do not know what he has died from. Life was never peaceful in our village area. So finally, to escape from religious and ethnic persecution, my parents fled to the Omjan refugee camp, Thailand in 2006 with all of us. And at the time, I was just 9 years old. And I'm always thankful for the right decision that my parents made, because after we moved to camp, all of us could attend school for free, worship freely, and the important thing is we have enough food to eat. Even so, it was not easy for me and my siblings because when I first started school in the camp, I was not able to communicate with other kids because of the language barrier. My mother language is Ching and my second language is Burmese. But in the camp, when I start school, all the subjects are taught in Korean language, which I never heard of or saw before. So many days I come home from school crying and I just wanted to give up. But however, my mother, she always encouraged me to continue my study, and she found a tutor who could teach me basic Korean reading and writing after school. So since back then, I decided not to give up to study, and even though I faced any hardship or problems, and I graduated from Dubai number two high school in camp in 2015 and was fortunate to be able to leave the camp and join NGO funded diploma of leadership and community development at White Horizon in the border town of Mesot. And at the time, I still was not a refugee with no identity in Thailand, but if we stay quietly, we could study freely here. In the final part of this program was a 10-month internship that I completed in Shaytree Foundation, NGO that works for the empowerment of migrant workers and their families in Mesot. I was so happy to be offered a full-time position as project coordinator of family education program at the completion of my internship. And for the first time, staying in Thailand for 11 years, Shaytree make it possible for me to be a legal migrant worker by applying Burmese passport and Thai work visa. And I have now been leading this program for 2 years, and we are developing trainings module which we will conduct with Burmese migrant community in Mesot, and to raise awareness and promote healthy families. So with my co-workers, we have developed trainings in early child development, positive parenting class, and also sex education, women's health, and healthy pregnancy in Burmese language to train Burmese migrant parents in poor migrant worker communities to give family understanding and tools to keep their children healthy in body and mind, and also to show their children that they are loved, and also to give their children that they are the relational security to grow strong. So from a child myself, in a poor removed community where my mother suffered many miscarriage and the death of two of her children without understanding the cause, it is very rewarding for me now to see that, like, see lives of family transformed by what we teach them. And I also get to hear mothers saying that for the first time their household is peaceful, and I get to hear a father thanking us for showing them that, like, they can show warmth to their children rather than beating them. And I get to see family bring and being stronger together even in difficulty. So continuously working at the Shade Tree Foundation, I enrolled as a working student in the Australia Catholic University, which is also called ACU Thai-Burma Border Program. It is a diploma of liberal study, and I started in May 2019, and I have just successfully completed this diploma. There were 8 courses in this study, and among which global health study increased my understanding and developed in me a strong sense and awareness of public health across both developed and developing countries. So both my work and experience have shaped my goal to be a qualified public health educator, so I can actively contribute to improving healthcare access for Myanmar community in Western Myanmar, such as where I grew up. And now I have applied for the enrollment at Mayflower University to study public health to gain professional knowledge and skills of public health sector to ably assist community need to develop action plans, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation strategies that have the capacity to improve the health of rural Myanmar. And I also really wanted to be a public health educator as well. And finally, during this time, I would like to describe a little bit about our Myanmar situation. During this time, Myanmar is suffering and violence is occurring everywhere. And Myanmar military juntas are killing the civilians every day, everywhere. And because of people are stepping up and speaking out for the democracy. And also now we can see that all schools are shut down and many young students have been shot. And even there was a 7-year-old girl had been shot 2 days ago. And things have been pretty rough for almost 2 months, and it is only getting worse. So my hope is that the international community will realize our pain, our suffer, and listen and heed the words of our UN envoy, Dr. Sasa, who is chill like me. And I also pray for my country and my people to be restored to democracy and the new generation to rise and make the better future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zan. I appreciate you sharing your story with us, and you certainly are an inspiration for all of us, and I appreciate that. And we would ask if you're able to stay until our Q&A session at the end. I know that there's some of the audience who would love to ask you some questions if you have time. So yeah, thank you so much, Zan. At this point, yeah, great. And at this point, what we want to do is we would like to transition into our panel discussion. And we'll have each of our panelists initially present to us for about 10 minutes. And among other things, they'll each present on their work with displaced students in Asia Pacific. They'll share what they view as perhaps some of the most pressing needs to address, and also their hope for future initiatives in this area. And we'd like to begin this time with Dr. Barney Glover, the Vice-Chancellor and President of Western Sydney University, to share with us. And Barney, I'd like to ask you to go ahead and turn on your camera. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's wonderful to be here. If we could bring up my first slide as we begin. As excuse me, as Jonathan indicated, I'm the Vice-Chancellor and President at Western Sydney University in Sydney, in Australia. And it's wonderful to have an opportunity to be with you today. And thank you, Zam, for your presentation a moment ago to demonstrate the great challenges that you've had to address and the way you've successfully navigated through those challenges. A great role model for many, but also recognising the very difficult circumstances in Myanmar at the moment. I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the lands of the Barramatical people of the Darug Nation of Aboriginal people in Australia, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders past and present. And again, thank you to IIE and Jonathan for the invitation. I'm very keen to hear the other panel members discuss the topic of higher education initiatives in the Asia Pacific. I hope I can give you a little context about my university and what we're doing in partnership. Just at the outset, I think we can't ignore the challenges that have been presented by COVID in 2020, the regional challenges more broadly that Zam has just touched on, but particularly the pandemic that's confronted us, the impact that's had on individuals, communities right across the globe, and particularly the impact it's had on education. But there are elements that have emerged from the pandemic as we move, hopefully, to a phase where with vaccination programs over the next year or so, we'll be able to see this pandemic come under control. But mobility, which has been affected so significantly, is an issue that has required us to pivot towards other ways of engaging during this period, and really highlighted one thing I hope we talk about, and that is the role of technology in connecting us, both in times of crisis, but in opening up opportunities for richer higher education opportunities, particularly for displaced persons in the region. So a lot to cover, but I think a very important topic. If we could go to the next slide. Again, a little more about Western Sydney University to place it in context. And I just wanted to emphasize, like many Australian universities, we operate a campus overseas, in our case, in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, and you can see a shot of it there with some of our students and staff in Vietnam. This is a very important model of collaboration between my university and the University of Economics in Ho Chi Minh City, UEH, and importantly, the International School of Business, ISB at UEH. They are great partners for us, and they have very much, that partnership has enabled us to explore ways that we can support education for displaced persons in the Asia Pacific region, but particularly on the Thai-Myanmar border. The actual relationship with UEH dates back to 2008. So it's been now over a decade of very strong partnership with that university and Western Sydney. And our campus facilities were opened in 2015. Over that period of time, we have collaborated on DBA programs, MBA programs, a very vibrant and significant Bachelor of Business program. We're expanding that now to pick up a Master's in Education for teacher training in Vietnam, but for the ASEAN region more broadly, and to expand into communication studies and IT in the very near future. At the moment, we have over 600 graduates from that campus to date, and a significant cohort of students enrolled there at the moment. And a very important part of the topic for today and our response to it, of course, is the tripartite partnership we have between Western Sydney University, the University of Economics in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, and of course, IIE. And I thank Jonathan for the work that he's done in helping to bring that to fruition. We signed our MOU in March of 2019 to look at ways we could work together to support placement opportunities for academically talented refugees. It was great to hear a moment ago from Zam the involvement of the Australian Catholic University program on the Thai-Myanmar border, and we're certainly proud of what we are doing and hope to do even more significantly in the years to come. If we could go to the next slide. Thank you. To tell you a little bit about our scholarship program, these photos relate to the first two students that we brought in from the Thai-Myanmar border as displaced persons, Silver and Smile, you can see on screen. IIE initially nominated 26 students on that Thai-Myanmar border to apply for scholarships to study at Western Sydney University, to study a degree with us at our Vietnam campus. And the two in the first round that were successful are Silver and Smile. They commenced in March of 2020. And of course, they will complete their degrees in December next year. They have been incredibly successful academically in the program. We're very proud of their efforts. We provide the full scholarship support with UEH, so living allowance, support for work opportunities with the International School of Business in our campus in Vietnam, as well as, of course, complete tuition fee coverage and a range of other social and cultural activities for those students. So we're very, very pleased at their progress and how well they're doing. And now that we have a master's program in education to begin, we're looking forward to that opportunity being available to both Silver and Smile to go on and do postgraduate study with us in Vietnam. But it's a great case study of collaboration in the region between an Australian university, a Vietnamese university, and IIE to support higher education opportunities for displaced persons. Now, at the moment, we're looking forward to the next group of students joining Silver and Smile. At the moment, COVID has made that more challenging, but we're waiting for another group of students to join them in Ho Chi Minh City, and then we're looking to build the program over time. So very committed to this as a long-term initiative jointly with IIE. If we could go to the next slide. I wanted to talk a little more about our activities in Australia in relation to refugees and asylum seekers and our humanitarian visa holders and the support we provide them and humanitarian support through our university. There is a particularly important aspect of this, and we recognise the life-changing nature of scholarship programs like this that offer financial assistance for both the costs of study and living expenses for refugees, for asylum seekers, and those on humanitarian visas in Western Sydney. And to lift those burdens and provide opportunities is life-changing. And there's one example on the screen, Deng Adut, who is a law graduate. He was a child soldier in the Sudan over 20 years ago. The United Nations helped Deng to leave, to escape Sudan from a refugee camp in Uganda, to come to Australia, to Western Sydney, eventually to be able to enroll in our law program. He's a law graduate. He runs a very successful law practice, very much focused on humanitarian law in Western Sydney. And he is much lauded for the contribution he makes in Australia. And he was the New South Wales, in our state, Australian of the Year in recognition of the wonderful work that he does. As an example of the great contribution refugees can make when they have the opportunity to undertake higher education wherever they may be in the world. It is transformational for them and for the communities that they are part of. Professor Peter Shergold, AC, is our Chancellor at Western Sydney University, but he is also the New South Wales Coordinator General for Refugee Resettlement in New South Wales, and he's been a leading spokesperson for providing opportunities for refugee resettlement in New South Wales. And he was instrumental in the university establishing our own scholarship fund with an initial $500,000 contribution towards scholarships. And that's now grown to in excess of $2.5 million that we provide in scholarships for refugees, asylum seekers, and those on humanitarian visas to study within the university and across a whole range of areas. We're a very large Australian university, over 50,000 students, very comprehensive programs that we offer. So great opportunity to offer a breadth of opportunity to those students who are able to study with us. And we're very fortunate now to have been offering these scholarships since 2016 through 2017 through till now, and to see the graduates coming through that program and to see the difference that it's making to their lives, whether they're graduating in social work degrees, teaching degrees, medical degrees, medical science degrees, law, a whole range of education, engineering, and humanities programs that those students are graduating from. And I did want to mention, of course, in the context at the moment of the challenges that are facing all of us around the region and around the world, and particularly to international students who travelled to study in Australia prior to COVID, and who have been living in Australia in very difficult circumstances because they can't return to their home countries, and the support that has been provided. And I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. But I did want to emphasise, just before I leave this slide, and our partnership with UEH, just how important it is to have these regional partnerships as a key to responding to educational opportunity for displaced persons, and the way technology is enabling partnership to be enriched and enhanced, even in times of great difficulty in a regional level, whether through the pandemic or more generally. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. This just gives you a snapshot of some of the support we've provided to our students during this very difficult time in Australia. Significant investment in support for hardship allowances, for food vouchers for students, month after month to support them, and a whole range of direct assistance programs that we have offered to students through our Western Success program, both here in Australia, but importantly to our students studying with us overseas. And we have hundreds of students around the region who are receiving support through this program, not just those that are in Australia. Conscious of time, if I go to the next slide. Thank you. Just to indicate, one of the things we're very proud of at our university is our commitment to sustainability, and particularly to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. In the Times Higher Education University Impact Rankings, we're ranked number 3 in the world for our commitment to the UN SDGs. And this reflects our commitment through research and teaching and engagement, community engagement, to doing what we can to help our region to support the achievement of the UN SDGs over the next decade. And we're very pleased to see that recognised right around the world. As I conclude, I wanted to emphasise a number of things about higher education initiatives in the Asia Pacific, and particularly to support displaced persons. Partnerships between educational institutions. Now we have a rich way of engaging, an even richer way than face-to-face engagement has been the core of partnership for so long. We now have technology to help us, and we need strong partnerships as we have with UEH as an example of that. Secondly, we need to use technology in innovative ways, and I'm sure that will be a topic that we can discuss in the next few minutes in the panel discussion. And I do think we need to take exemplars of good practice. And you heard Zam talking about the Australian Catholic University example, what we're doing. That could be expanded to many other institutions within the region to work in partnership with regional universities and regional providers of education to look for ways, working together in new and innovative ways with partners like IIE to really make a difference in enabling accessible education. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barney. And just to reiterate, Western Sydney University has just been a great example of providing leadership in this area. And as you noted, partnerships. We're thankful for the IIE partnership with Western Sydney and the great work that you guys have been able to do through our relationship. So thank you for sharing, and we look forward to hearing more of your comments in a few minutes. But before we do that, we'd like to hear from our next panelist, who is Gardi, who's the CEO and founder of Empower, and the co-founder of the Center for Asia Pacific Refugee Studies at the University of Auckland. And she'll share a bit about her work, what she sees as some of the most pressing challenges, and her hopes for future engagement and how we can do that better. And Rez, we're thankful she's calling in. It's quite early there. She's calling in from Erbil. It's an early morning, but Rez, if you could turn your camera on, we'll turn it over to you for the next 10 minutes or so.
Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā au, ko Zagros te maunga, ko Tigris te awa, ko Gardi te iwi, ko tika tangata te waka, ko Rez Gardi aho, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. That was my pipiha in Māori. A pipiha is a way of introducing yourself in Māori, the indigenous language of Aotearoa, New Zealand. It tells people who you are by sharing your connections with the people and places that are important to you. So despite being on the other side of the world now in Erbil, the Kurdish capital of Iraq, for me, it's important to start with a pipiha in respect of the place I was fortunate to be resettled to and given a home away from persecution, and that's Aotearoa, New Zealand. My name is Rez Gardi, and I'm very humbled to be here today alongside such an esteemed panel. I'm a former Kurdish refugee. My family fled the genocidal campaign against the Kurds, and I was born in a refugee camp in Pakistan, where my family spent about 9 years before being resettled to New Zealand. And after all these years, despite many protests from my parents, last year in January 2020, I returned to the region where they once fled from many years ago to work as a Harvard Satter Human Rights Fellow and international lawyer based in the Kurdish region of Iraq, gathering evidence for the prosecution of ISIS for the targeted genocidal campaign of the Yazidi minority population. I'm also the co-founder of the Center for Asia Pacific Refugee Studies at the University of Auckland and the founder of Empower. And I'll describe a little bit more about the work that we've been doing through both of those organizations. In Pakistan, where I was born, I was denied an education because of my refugee status. And then in New Zealand, unfortunately, despite the access to education, I was demotivated when I was in high school when a careers advisor told me that I should consider other options because law school would be too difficult for someone like me, meaning a refugee with no history of education in the family. People like me didn't finish school, let alone end up at university. All our lives, we are trained to survive. Being a refugee means that our existence is based on just trying to survive just another day and to reach safety. And that's all we ever dreamed of. So wanting more than safety and survival in that context seemed ungrateful. And yet there I was, Rez, the ungrateful refugee, dreaming of things that were not really supposed to be for me, such as going to law school. But to me, it was not just about studying law. It was about all the barriers, the stereotypes, and the assumptions that I wanted to crush to prove that we as refugees could dream bigger than the constraints of our identities and experiences allowed. And it was about taking back control of our lives and one day, hopefully, being able to influence the laws that apply to people who are displaced as I once was. And so now I'm a Harvard educated lawyer fighting for refugee youth to have access to education. And that's why I founded Empower, to address the critical gap of refugee youth in education and to change those statistics. Through Empower, our mission is very simply to empower, educate, and enable refugee youth through education, leadership, and capacity building so that they too can pursue meaningful paths of their choice and contribute to their own futures and the futures of their family and community. Through Empower, we run workshops and camps across the globe using innovative ways to access education, because as we know, there simply aren't enough schools to accommodate all the young people and to prepare them for university. So far, we've been able to provide workshops around the globe for over 20,000 young people. And the second aspect of our program is the mentoring program. The mentoring program so far has been limited to New Zealand, and the mentoring program supports young people who are at a critical age. And we know in New Zealand, in particular, the stats show that young people tend to drop out of school around fourth form or year 10, which is about 15 years old. And so what we do through Empower is try to reach those young people before dropping out of school. As we know, there are so many reasons for why they drop out of school, but to try help them stay in school and to encourage them to pursue career paths or educational paths through education that they otherwise may have not thought would be possible for someone like them. And we also provide a mentoring program for those who are already, have stayed beyond the that critical age of dropouts rate. So when they're in their second or last year of high school, to prepare them for university, and then also a mentoring program for those who are in university to help them survive and excel once they're in that program. Our workshops that we run both in New Zealand and have run across the globe in camps, and also currently working on launching in Iraq, cover skills that are important for refugees' futures and prepare them for higher education. They really focus on skills that aren't necessarily taught in a school environment or in a classroom. And it's some soft skills such as financial literacy, how to study effectively, how to apply for scholarships all around the world, how to draft applications for universities, how to get your CV in order to be able to stand out as a candidate for these scholarships, and other fundamental skills that aren't really taught in a classroom. We also offer ongoing support through our monthly newsletter and our online speaker series, which amplify refugee youth voices around the globe. In my capacity as the co-founder of the Asia Pacific Center for Asia Pacific Refugee Studies, my co-founders and I, Dr. Gul Enich and Professor Jay Marlowe, established the Center for Asia Pacific Refugee Studies, an academic institution based at the University of Auckland, which seeks to respond to challenges of forced displacement through evidence-based scholarship and high-impact research to inform positive approaches it's based at the University of Auckland and seeks to respond to challenges of forced displacement through evidence-based scholarship and high impact research to try and inform positive approaches to support forcibly displaced people who have been forcibly displaced both by climate change and conflict-induced displacement. The Centre offers non-residential graduate fellowships to enable the conversion of conflict and climate-based research conducted by scholars who have experiences of forced displacement and to turn that into impact. The Centre also plans to instigate and fund site-specific projects with immediate practical impact for young refugee learners by combining emergent digital technologies with innovative models of learning. And through my association with the University of Auckland as an alumni, I've also acted as an appeals ambassador to help raise funds for scholarships for refugee background students to study at the University of Auckland. There are now scholarships available every year, about 3 scholarships per year for the next 6 years we've managed to raise. And then lastly, the Opening Universities for Refugees Hour, which was formerly an independent initiative, but now operates under the Centre for Asia Pacific Refugee Studies. Through Hour, we've hosted numerous forums bringing together diverse stakeholders to collaborate and create strategies for effecting change, which we identify as the 3 Cs, and that's why our forums are called the 3C Forum. And so the forum participants represent a range of organizations working in this space. They've often included people from UNHCR offices, non-governmental organizations, universities, schools, research organizations, community learning centers, and community activists. And the 3C Forum utilizes an unconference format, which creates participant-driven dialogue rather than following a prescribed program. And so unlike traditional professional gatherings in this unconference format, it's very participant oriented where the attendees decide on the agenda. And this flexibility provides an opportunity for diverse stakeholders to work collaboratively on topics of common interest, and provides the foundation for collective consideration of solutions. And one of our, I guess, the important initiatives driving out of the 3C forums that we've held was from the 3C forum held in Malaysia, which was the Connecting and Equipping Refugees for Tertiary Education course, the CERT course, to deal with the problem of bridging between secondary and tertiary education for refugee students. So it was a collaborative effort between our and UNHCR Malaysia, Teach for Refugees, Payong, and local universities. It's a 3-week program that provides refugee youth exposure to university life and builds hard and soft skills necessary for success at the higher educational level. We're currently partnering with UNHCR Malaysia to move the CERT program online. Since 2016, we've had 95 students complete the program and receive CERT certificates. And this soft skill model, due to the pandemic, is now going to be moved online from September 2021. Another initiative is that the Centre for Asia Pacific Refugee Studies, CAPRS, has offered a pledge to UNHCR in 2019. So we're currently leading a task force and working closely with Times Higher Education Ranking Agency and with the Connected Learning and Crisis Consortium and with UNHCR to try change the impact rankings criteria, which I'll discuss hopefully in our panel discussion to keep this aspect of my presentation shorter. And we're also currently partnering with UNHCR Copenhagen Bureau to design a regional campaign on access to higher education. It's something I'm very excited that will be launched in June 2021. So more information on that, keep your eyes open. And lastly, a collaboration between both the organizations that I have founded, so Empower and also co-founded this CAPRS. We're collaborating on student support systems and a mentoring program to be provided throughout the university for all students with refugee background. So far Empower has been running a mentoring program since 2017 for refugee students in New Zealand. And now we're working with the centre to launch that at the University of Auckland throughout, so that the University of Auckland can take a lead on really institutionalizing this kind of support, because yes, we have the scholarship for the students, but they also need support once they're in this university system to be able to successfully navigate a university life and also get support for their studies. So I will just leave it at that for now, but really looking forward to engaging through the Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rez. A very impressive portfolio of engagements that you're involved with. And I was especially struck by your work with mentoring and this idea that refugees can dream big dreams, right? And they shouldn't be limited in that area. So thank you. I look forward to hearing more from you a little bit later. And at this point, we'll transition to our final panelist presentation, which is Greg Tyrosvoutis, co-founder and director of TeacherFOCUS Myanmar. He'll be joining us from Mae Sot on the Thai-Myanmar border. And I would ask Greg, go ahead and turn your camera on, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and it is an honor to be on a panel with such esteemed colleagues whose experience and commitment to providing access to education opportunities for displaced youth, it's really remarkable. And what I hope to do in this brief presentation this morning is try and contextualize that to the situation here on the Thai-Myanmar border, and also dream big, like Rez shared about what can we do, what can we innovate in order to provide more access to higher education for youth that have been displaced. Could I ask that my presentation is brought up? Great. Thanks so much. So before I begin, I'll give a brief background on TeacherFOCUS and what we do. I'd also like to say that in order to frame this challenge and the opportunities that we have here on the border, we're going to look through the lens of geometry. I think it's, for me, the clearest way to kind of capture the challenges that are happening here. So next slide, please. So a little bit about TeacherFOCUS. So we work with 3 parallel education systems. The first is with migrant learning centers based here in Thailand on the border. These are unregistered schools serving about 10,000 migrant children these schools were established by the migrant community themselves in order to provide access to education for their children in their mother tongue language, Burmese. And these schools have evolved over the past 30 years to being able to provide recognized education certificates from Myanmar for their students. There's been great strides in this area, but still a lot more work needs to be done. The second group we work with is refugee education within the 9 refugee camps along the border, supporting them and their teachers through research and teacher training. And the third parallel system we work with is ethnic education systems in the southeast of Myanmar. So those who are familiar with the Myanmar context, you have many parallel education systems supporting the education for marginalized children and youth living in ethnic areas that largely border or are found on Myanmar's borders. So we provide teacher training, we do educational research and capacity building, consulting to try and create bridges for teachers and for children to higher education. On the next slide, just a little bit of background about the refugee camps on the border here. So since 1984, so over 35 years, refugees from Myanmar have been displaced in Thailand. We have currently 9 camps along the border with a current population of just about 92,000, and 20,000 of those are children enrolled in basic education schools. These camps have resiliently continued to exist despite numerous challenges, various administrations, politics, natural disasters, and have provided some incredibly high quality education that has resulted in many refugee youth being able to access higher education at internationally recognized universities. This has largely been done through the work of the Karen Refugee Committee, KRCE, as well as the Karenni Education Department. Next slide, please. And as Zam articulated, here on the border, the situation is incredibly tense. Due to the coup and the violence occurring within Myanmar, 11 refugee camp sites have been vetted here along the border. They are expecting and planning for up to 40,000 people to come across into Thailand. There's been educational humanitarian planning ongoing with the Ministry of Interior. And so we know that displacement is unlike the unfortunate likely future here on the border. And so we need to plan for that. We need to think carefully and plan how can we best accommodate this population. As Zam mentioned, as of yesterday, 300 people have lost their lives protesting, 7 of which are children younger than the age of 15. So you have egregious violence and displacement happening, and we need to mobilize now to best prepare for that, the incoming all too likely future that more displaced youth will enter the border. So to frame this, I want to give an example. So what you're looking at here is a graph of student enrollment by grade in my home province in Canada, in Ontario. So this is grade by grade enrollment. And what you can see is that year to year, it's fairly similar. It actually mirrors the birth rate for those respective years quite closely. What this means is that a student that finishes grade 3, almost 100% of the time goes on to grade 4. And a student that finishes grade 4, almost 100% of the time goes on to grade 5. And this continues all the way until the end of basic education in Ontario, grade 12. Grade 12, you can also stay another year. So that's why it kind of balloons out at the end there. But the point I'm trying to make is that if we were to kind of plot this, the shape that we get is a rectangle. If you could click the slide for me. There we go. So, so grade by grade, you have a fairly consistent enrollment. Students who finish one grade largely go on to the next. This is not the case for displaced youth. So I'll share some examples. On the next slide, this is student enrollment here in MESOT year by year for the previous academic year. And you see completely different shape. At the beginning, in the younger grades, we have a lot of students enrolled, but grade by grade, as students continue, they begin to drop off. And this is a challenge that's been noted and articulated in so many different ways here on the border. And there are many great organizations working to address this issue. But if you could click the slide, you'll see that the geometry we create here is a triangle. So very few students finish basic education and make it to the end of grade 12, meaning very few students have that critical opportunity to access higher education. The ones that do end up becoming the champions of their communities. I've had the privilege of working at a higher education program called Minmaha, where we've provided scholarships for refugee and migrant youth. And I've been here long enough to now see all my students graduate, receive scholarships, and now they are the local heroes, running their own schools, running education and health programs in the places where they come from, which are some of the hardest to reach places. So we need to make sure that we're absolutely providing opportunities for those students who make it to the tip of that triangle. But we also need to think about how can we support the end of this geometry. If you could click the slide for me, you see these red areas are the students that drop out. And actually there are more students that drop out than complete. If you go next slide, please. We see the same pattern within the refugee camps here along the border. So I worked together with KRCE to put this data together. And you can see again, a lot of students that enroll very young and start their education, very, very few complete. And then we get that same triangle shape again. If you could click the slide for me. And lastly, in the next slide, this pattern is also the same within Myanmar. So here is the enrollment in government schools. And we see that same drop off happening. If you could click the slide, the triangle is clear. And in this case within Myanmar, because we have a lot of data and there's a lot of a larger population to track, we actually see that about only 20% of students finish their education in Myanmar. So 1 in 5 children completes a full basic education until grade 10. The rest drop out, the majority drop out. And so this is why the conversation we're having right now is so critical, because we need to build those bridges like Rez talked about for students who are able to get to the end of their basic education. Next slide, please. So why do refugee and migrant students drop out? We've done research both in the migrant areas as well as within the refugee camps, and we've kind of thematically coded them in 5 main areas. First, as a few of the panelists shared, many children leave early to work. And we've seen, especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic here, children leaving school as early as grade 3 or 4 to work dangerous and dirty and very difficult agricultural jobs for just $1 a day, $2 a day, because the economic impact of COVID. Students are dropping out to take care of younger siblings so their parents can continue to work and provide for their family. Especially within the camps, there are many cases of early marriage and pregnancy, so students dropping out to take care and start a family. We've also have a lot of documentation of substance abuse issues that force students to drop out of school. And one that I think we can actually work to address in a very concrete way is this lack of motivation and interest. So as I mentioned, the students who complete a university degree become the role models, become the champions to inspire other young children to complete their education. We need to raise up these heroes, and we need to provide bridges for them to access higher education. Next slide. So what can we do to change the geometry? How do we change this triangle to a rectangle or a square? First, I would say is to continue providing university scholarships. This is absolutely critical. The young people who obtain a scholarship, it's a huge investment for donors and universities. But I've seen the outcome of that investment time and time again, where you get young people empowered, refugees who are empowered, who know their communities, who know the challenges, and now are equipped to be able to tackle them in a real way. Number two, I would say, is support flexible, recognized pathways of education. We need to start to dream and innovate and think of new ways. This can be through the provision of online courses, but I would argue that online courses in and of themselves are not the solution, because it is very difficult, and I have seen very few examples of purely online programs which displaced youth are able to complete. So a huge challenge we see here on the border is young people who finished only partially a higher education program. They haven't been able to finish because of motivation issues, finance issues. And this is why, as Dr. Glover suggested, these hybrid models, I think, are really a key investment, meaning online programs with facilitators, local facilitators where the students are living. The same quality education is provided at a fraction of the cost, and students still get that mentorship support through a facilitator that Rez shared about. That is so important in order to retain students. We can also think about providing micro-credentials or certified tests. So a huge challenge for refugees and displaced youth is that they have these skills, they have experience, they're well educated, but they don't have that certification or that accreditation, that stamp that actually says from an institution somewhere that they can do what they say they can do. And so we need to think about how can we provide more of these micro-credentials and tests to students to be able to allow them access to higher education. And on this discussion, I was looking at the participants. We've got Child's Dream Foundation, which has provided hundreds of scholarships for migrant and refugee students here on the border. We've got Marist Asia Foundation, which partners with ACU in Renong to provide university scholarships for students there. We've got Minmaha, which is a local higher education program here in Mesat that helps students apply for universities. We've got Beam Foundation in Chiang Mai, which also has a GED program. We've got Youth Connect Foundation that does vocational training skills for young people who need some kind of credentialing in order to get a job. So we have a lot of models and a lot of programs, but support from institutions abroad is the next way forward. We need to provide accredited education for young people. The last point I'll make is this challenge of documentation. So as Zam mentioned, the situation in Myanmar right now is dire. No one is able to apply for a visa. No one is able to apply for a passport. So current students who are undocumented or young people hoping to access higher education, right now there is no pathway for them to get a recognized document that would allow them to enroll. The GED or TOEFL test require a passport to sit the test. So we need to, again, innovate and think about alternative ways. And so I'll close this presentation with one idea for everyone to think about on the next slide. This is the Nansen Passport. Some of you might be familiar with it. This was created after World War I. You had massive displacement throughout Europe and millions of refugees seeking to find an alternative place where they can safely continue their livelihoods. And so the Nansen Passport was developed in order to allow displaced people without documentation to travel to neighboring countries. It was, a lot of work went into it. They took big risks to establish this, but it paid off, a millionfold, because so many displaced people were able to continue their lives and actually have a livelihood because they could move around. This won the creator of this won the Nobel Prize, and the institute that continued to provide the passports also won a Nobel Prize. So I think we need to, those of us who have connections with UN agencies or organizations that can support documentation, we need to start thinking this way. What are different alternative ways to end this documentation challenge for refugees and displaced youth? So thank you very much for listening to this presentation. I look forward to the discussion along with my esteemed panel. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Greg. Appreciate your thoughts, and I love how you frame this with geometry as a kind of a powerful visual of the real need for engagement. As you noted, the issue of displacement, it's not as if this issue is going away, but we expect it, the need to, and the opportunity for us to engage as those interested in this issue to grow even more in the near future, and the real need for collaboration, innovation on this with the Nansen Passport. Yeah, thank you so much, Greg, and Therese and Barney. And we have about 20 minutes or so. And what I'd like to do is start us off with some moderated Q&A, and then we'll go into the Q&A with the audience. And I do want to remind the audience to please chat your questions in. If you have those, if you think of those now, don't hesitate to just put those in the chat box, and we'll collect those so we can make sure that we address those. And to start off the moderated Q&A with the panelists, I want to go back to one of the comments that both Greg and Barney made regarding online education, online learning. And I want to have Barney start us off with this. But my question to you, Barney and Greg and Rez, please jump in as you prefer. But the question is this: what challenges and opportunities, Barney, do online education and hybrid learning present for displaced students from your perspective?
Thanks, Jonathan. And they were great presentations. So thank you to Rez and to Greg for the presentations. As a mathematician, I love the geometry that Greg brought to it. And Rez, it wasn't that long ago, I was in Erbil in Iraq. So I'm glad you're there, and wonderful opportunities with the Kurdish community. I think this is one of the most exciting things that's emerged in a way, forced upon us because COVID forced us to look at a whole range of ways of engaging with each other locally and engaging with each other internationally. And it made us all rethink in the university sector in Australia how we're going to maintain quality partnerships internationally, of which we have hundreds, during this difficult period, and to support our colleagues overseas and students overseas. And so we looked to technologies like we're using today to enhance that. And I think Greg really touched on a couple of exciting elements of that. We need to conceptualize a new model of international education, in my view, which partly addresses what might happen till we get a Nansen Passport concept to give better mobility. But while we see bandwidth possibilities emerging, even in challenging parts of the world, whether that's through mobile telephony or other forms of telecommunications or video communication, whatever it might be, we have an opportunity working in partnership to deliver high quality education synchronously or asynchronously, because both are possible, and to have that local facilitation with a quality partner. And then you can address some of the demotivating elements of online that you talked about, Greg. And at the same time, we can start to see on scale delivery of educational opportunity. And that I think is an exciting option. It can also help us with the challenge around, for a university like Western Sydney, it would be English language. I'm sure for Auckland with Rez, there's also the importance of improving English language skills. And this gives us an opportunity to do that more creatively in an interactive online way, particularly in the region where we've got a time zone opportunity. In some ways, you get more complex when the time zones get out of sync. But I think this is singularly one of the most interesting things we should explore, and has great potential to work with organisations like Greg's. The #1 university in the world in Times Higher Ed is Auckland, so there's great opportunities there. So I think it's an emerging opportunity. We'll be exploring it. And I think we'll be looking for partnerships like the partnership we have with UEH in Vietnam, but equally partners embedded in areas like the Thai-Myanmar border.
Thank you, Barney. Now, Greg, I do want to ask, I mean, I know you've expressed some concern. I know you've had some experience with online education that I know from what you've said earlier that you have some real concern about how it can actually provide increased access. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I'd begin by echoing Rez's initiative and her points regarding mentorship. So I think that many institutions have developed very rigorous and comprehensive online modules, very interactive modules, not just reading and, doing a response as was my undergraduate online experience. But it's that mentorship that I think is so critical to help with motivation, to help with, I mean, it's for many students, this is a completely new world for them. And to have someone who can help guide them through that, I think is so important. And we've seen success with that kind of model here. And I think, Rez, maybe you can share a little bit about like what elements of the mentorship program do you think are kind of the highlights that need to be included in any hybrid model?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a big supporter of mentoring programs because during my time at university, I really struggled not having anyone around me who looked like me or who had been through similar experiences. So I think one of the keys to success at university and being able to seek opportunities that exist not just within the university, but also that come outside, such as internships and networking opportunities, is to have role models and mentors who've been through the same lived experiences, and for you to have that support and network to get the right advice. And I think this is really critical because mentoring, I think, is often overlooked because for people who have access or who are privileged enough to grow up in environments and to be surrounded by educated family members and networks, it seems that mentoring doesn't really add much value. But when we're thinking about the refugee youth who don't have access to such privileged communities and networks, then it becomes really critical. I think the key things that we need to ensure are present is having the mentoring program that is not just a one-off. I've seen many programs that pair up with a mentor and they have like one session and then the program kind of just dies down. I think it needs to be consistent. It needs to be regular, and it needs to be supported throughout the process, constantly getting feedback from both the mentees and mentors in terms of what's been working well, what's not working, and also support in terms of how the mentoring runs. Because I find that a lot of people, although it sounds pretty basic, you think you enter a mentoring program and you just hit it off and you're just going to speak and support your mentee. Actually, it can be really difficult to think about what topics to talk about and how to give the right kind of support. So having a model in place that has perhaps what we do through Empower is having, for example, this week, the topic is going to be such and such. Obviously with the flexibility that if the mentee or mentor has something particular that they want to discuss or need support on at any given time, that takes priority. But for mentees and mentors that sometimes hit that awkward silence and don't know how to bring up the topics that they talk about, we have some I guess topics or support to raise in a more formalized process and way that we provide to our mentors. And then I just want to also add a few points about online learning. I support what Greg and Dr. Barney have both have said. and a rapid move towards online education in the wake of the global COVID-19 pandemic, we saw in a matter of weeks universities around the world being forced to transfer their teachings from physical classrooms to online classrooms. So I think the pandemic really illuminated to us that online teaching and learning is not only possible, but actually a necessary development for the future of education, and that it can be harnessed to connect refugees and displaced populations to accredited academic institutions virtually in pursuit of their higher education. And it's something that advocates in this space have been crying out for years, that universities can very simply offer their programs virtually through e-learning options, providing opening doors for refugees and displaced people from around the globe to access these courses from wherever they are. But it's important to note that this move was not without challenges. It did prove that innovative alternatives to traditional classrooms are possible, and there were very positive impacts in relation to access to education for refugees in terms of, I think, importantly, showing that there are no more excuses, because we've seen very high quality, accessible courses delivered online around the globe. But I think it's not going to be the panacea on its own. It did provide, hit us with the reality that the need to provide additional support to refugee background students. And this is something that Empower was working with throughout the pandemic, because as a marginalized group, refugee background students face many barriers in their academic journeys, and these barriers were further exacerbated by the pandemic. For example, the lack of access to a reliable internet connection, the lack of access to an electronic device to use for their studies, because often there was only one device available for the entire family. The crowded living situations, which makes studying very difficult, and often, being surrounded by family members, not having a very quiet space to join the online sessions or to even just study in an environment like that. And then also the language barriers, which depend on physically assessing the contextual situation for understanding. For a lot of our participants in our Empower program, they commented that they struggled in the online context, because when you had a face-to-face classroom, you could, even if your English was not, or the language you speak, but for in our context was English, was not that good, you often understand what was being presented based on the context and the body language of the presenter, but that was taken away during the online learning. And so there was also the challenge of difficulty of asking questions in online context amongst, for example, confidence, or perhaps, again, the context of where you're studying, or the people that are surrounding you made it difficult to ask questions, or the opportunity to go to the professor after the class had ended to ask your question, and versus online setting, making that more difficult. So these challenges are things we need to consider as well. So I think we have a unique opportunity to put universities at the forefront of the online revolution by offering online or blended learning to displaced communities, but it's critical for universities to evolve and be creative in the way and in what they offer and how they offer it. So a new approach to education for displaced communities is possible, but I think it really requires all of us to play our part in tackling the issue.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. I want to turn it back over to Barney. I know he has his hand raised, but just to, I think, shortly recap, you're saying, both Greg and Rez, in terms of the idea of sustained mentorship, that would be an ideal complement to simply content delivery that's virtual. There also needs to be that context of relationship and mentorship over a period of time to really make that work and be a viable option. Barney, you had your hand raised.
I just wanted to emphasize just a couple of quick points following up from what Rez said. I mean, all of those challenges in the online framing are true. They're true irrespective of a person's context. They're true in Western Sydney and in Auckland and on the Thai-Myanmar border. And I think they're manageable and we can address them, but it does take the coordination between mentorship and support programs between quality online delivery, but very importantly, local facilitation and support. It's the way we combine those elements together. The other point I wanted to emphasize that Greg put up was recognized accredited pathways are crucial here. You know, I think there's a lot of stuff out there in the Ethernet around, we can, lots of MOOCs, lots of things offered by, you know, very prestigious universities, but they're not credentialed and they're not necessarily recognized. We need to be right behind programs that deliver a recognized credential that is transferable. And I think blockchain has a role to play here too, by the way. I think we need to get blockchain involved in giving us reliable ways to do at least the educational credentialing cheaply and accessibly, but let's make it recognized. I think Greg had the word in there. It's a really important aspect of it.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thanks for those comments, Barney. We have a few minutes left before I want to carve out a little time for questions from the audience. But before we did that, I did want to ask a follow-up question and back it up a little bit. So we're talking about education for displaced students, but I want to back it up prior to that, and I want to start with Greg and just ask you, prior to enrollment within higher education, within university, bachelor's degree, how can displaced students be better prepared to succeed at university?
Yeah, great question. I think what I would first refer to is maybe what I would call the bright spots. So there are local programs all over the world that effectively prepare young people for higher education. So I mentioned a few, and some of them have joined this talk, which is great. And I think that it's that networking piece that's really needed between those local educational bridging programs and institutions. Barney mentioned a lot about these partnerships that are so critical, right? That's what's going to make the difference. To me, I see the biggest challenge for young people to access higher education is documentation. I mean, here on the border, I think that is number one. It is currently impossible. There is no way that a young person can enroll in university right now because the Myanmar has completely destabilized. There's no visas, there's no passports being issued. And so the only way to move forward here on the border is some kind of hybridized model that brings education, recognized education to the people here, or this kind of, you could call it the Nansen Passport or a convention travel document, something that enables young people to go to the education places. But I think there are these bright spots, these programs that produce students that are ready, right? Dr. Glover mentioned Smile and Silver, who I met in Ho Chi Minh last year. I mean, exceptional students who are academically, no question, they'll succeed. But we just need to get the pieces right to be able to get them to the school or get school to them.
Thanks, Greg. Rez, do you does that make sense to you in terms of what you're seeing for students to be prepared for university? Is it documentation? Are there other challenges that you see from your perspective?
Absolutely. I agree with what Greg is saying. Documentation is one of the biggest challenges for refugees to access education, and continues to impact not only the education, but also access to other services, even if they happen to have access to some sort of education. Again, I think the examples that Greg has provided, and what I've been saying, is that a sustained mentoring program is really critical, because even when you've got universities like we've seen increasingly universities around the world offering scholarships for refugee students, but no form of support once they have given the scholarships. And I think that is part of the problem. It's great that students can get scholarships to attend university and continue their education, but on its own, it's really not enough to ensure the success, and also to ensure that the students remain in higher education institutions without any form of mentorship or pastoral care once they're in the system. I think also an important point to make, the global crisis such as the one we're facing requires a global response. But I think for an overall change to materialize, the whole of society needs to play an active role. And in particular, I think universities have a really critical role to play in an increasingly consumer-oriented global education marketplace. One of the few things that unites universities is the global ranking system, and global ranking systems, as we know, is used by students to help them choose where to study, used by staff looking for career opportunities, and by research teams seeking new collaborative partners. And so these rankings, although there have been criticisms about how rankings come to be and what criteria are involved, they're very important. So I think that rankings, because they're used by institutions to benchmark themselves against global competitors and even by governments to set their national higher education agendas, if offering education for displaced communities became a criteria, such as under a humanitarian or international community outreach in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, if these were included in the ranking system, I think it would act as a catalyst for all universities to engage in some form to provide, whether it's scholarships and mentoring programs or directly in online blended learning or whatever the model is. But having that as a criteria, I think will really act as a catalyst for universities to provide some sort of access for refugee youth. And this tiny modification to the assessment criteria offered by these ranking agencies globally could reach all universities and not only have an immediate, but also a long-term impact for access to education. So I think that's something that we should really be considering.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Rez. It's not always just simply a scholarship question. There are other resources you noted, support on the front end that helps ensure the success of that student. I want to address a question from the audience, and maybe Barney, I could have you start this, initiate the response. But the question is this, is that for a large university like Western Sydney, what are the 2 to 3 biggest challenges in creating a partnership with local education providers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I did quickly try to respond online as well to this one to keep the technology theme running. Look, I would imagine, in my perspective, there's a leadership issue here. And to go to Rez's comment a moment ago, we do need to put pressure on the Times Higher Ed rankings to pick up an idea like that and have it implemented. Perfectly reasonable. And whether we like it or not, there are universities around the world that are driven by rankings. And that's fine, that could be their motivation. But if there's an incentive within that scheme that would encourage them to pick up the sorts of models that Rez and Greg are talking about, then that's something we should applaud. And I look at it from an Australian perspective. I'm sure it's similar with New Zealand and other countries. The number of opportunities in Southeast Asia in the campus network of Australian universities to pick up a model not dissimilar to what we're doing is one model that might work. It needs an ASEAN perspective to it. But to come to Frank's question, I mean, leadership here is crucial to leadership on both sides, the potential partners overseas and the partner university. You need a strength of leadership to carry this in your organisation. There are myriad pressures on presidents and vice-chancellors, and you need that sort of leadership. You need mutual respect between the organisations, because that will lead you to confidence in the programs that you want to develop. And you've got to be prepared to be entrepreneurial. There is a piloting and risk-taking element that gives you confidence on success. And we've got to be prepared to manage that. And I think they're elements that can bring us forward quickly, as well as, I think, just advocating the models more powerfully in our communities. And I think that's a vital part of getting others on board and willing to say, well, that model is working. We can invest. We may have a philanthropic partner that comes in to assist us. And then you've got the right mix to make a very successful outcome.
Thanks, Barney. Greg, have you seen, in terms of your work with external partners, I know you've had some engagements with universities, have you seen particular factors that are key in making a successful partnership between a local NGO and a university?
Yeah, I guess I would start by, so TeacherFOCUS has a new partnership with Arizona State University through their Education for Humanity department. And so next month, we're starting up an online English program for migrant youth with one of our staff facilitating it here. And the youth each get a laptop, which they can use to track with the program, and they meet every 2 weeks. But that wasn't possible. I mean, IIE made that possible through networking with Jonathan and going to Ho Chi Minh last year. That's where that started. And so I think for groups, I think there's a question from Frank's question, as well as Dr. Shirley's question. I think they resonate that of how can local programs in places like the Thai-Myanmar border network with institutions to make those opportunities. I totally agree with Dr. Glover. There needs to be that entrepreneurial element. You gotta take a risk. It might not work out. There are a lot of challenges in getting a program going and getting students to actually complete that program. But I feel like an organization like IIE is critical. Someone who knows the institutions and who knows organizations on the ground and can match them together. And if those elements of leadership and innovation, if there's a melding, you'll have that success, because we don't need to convince anyone in this discussion that more opportunities are needed. That's widely understood. There's a bottleneck for displaced youth across all contexts to access higher education. So it's just that partnership, I think, is so needed.
Great, thanks so much. Greg, I want to be conscious of our time. We're close to the 90-minute mark. I think I'd like to do this. I'd like to ask Dr. Glover, Rez, and Greg, if you could leave us with one point that you would encourage the audience to take away.
I think I could start on that one. I think Jonathan has maybe dropped out a little bit, but I could see others. Look, I think the one point from me would be to re-emphasize this partnership opportunity. Now, I know my university's very interested in working with Greg around TeacherFOCUS. I'm sure there's something we can do there. There's been a couple of really interesting questions coming in around how do you recognize some of the challenging backgrounds that students might have. Well, we can do that. We can, if we work together with good local support and facilitation, to actually be able to accommodate that. There are great students. That's not the issue. The issue is getting through some of those bureaucratic hurdles, taking some risks, yes, but delivering at the other end a graduate who can come back and do so much for the region. So it's partnership is the message for me. It's crucial, and I'm looking forward to keeping in touch with Greg.
Great. Thanks, Barney. Rez?
Yeah, I agree. I also think that we need a whole of society approach. We need to have a dynamic network of experts from across a range of diverse educational cultural backgrounds to be engaged in innovative and robust conversations about the inclusivity and quality of access to quality education. We need new stakeholders that go beyond governments, NGOs, and tertiary education providers and international humanitarian agencies. So I think it's really important to get actors that haven't really been in this field before involved. And I think it's a unique opportunity to do that now.
Great, thank you so much, Rez. And Greg, I'll give you the final word for our session.
Thanks. From my side, I would say there's a great question here from Mark about equivalency, and also Weipo Ong about recognizing prior learning. This is a huge challenge faced here, and the reality is for so many youth in the ASEAN region, to get a credentialed certificate, it's more than likely going to be in English, in the English language. So whether it's TOEFL or IELTS or GED, I remember my first job here on the border was teaching math and science, and I was teaching math, a math problem to students about calculating the area of your lawn, how much snow, surface area of snow that fell on their lawn. Well, people here don't have lawns, and they definitely don't have snow. And so I thought, this is ridiculous. Why are we, using the GED that's all based in Western culture to get these students accredited? Is this not a step backwards? And I've changed my mind over teaching there for years. If students can answer those kinds of questions where they have so few contextual clues, they will succeed at university, bar none, no problem. But I think that recognition piece is huge. Parallel systems are not recognized. And so we need that flexibility, whether it's the documentation in order to take an accredited test, or thinking about, there's been rumors of an ASEAN GED for the past 10 years. And I haven't seen a lot of movement on that, but I think, echoing Rez's points about, that when we think about displaced youth, we actually need to think of more comprehensive support, more flexibility, because they need that in order to succeed. And so having that, having a local organization involved, I think that's where that mutual respect that Dr. Glover talked about comes into play, that an institution recognizes and respects that the challenges on the ground are real, and then working together to find out, okay, how can we overcome this? What it's not going to be straightforward, like enrolling an Australian citizen into Australian university, but how can we do that together? So that it's a conversation, and it's a community approach, just like Rez mentioned.
All right, thanks so much, Greg. Thank you, Rez. Thank you, Barney. I think we'll take away maybe just 3 key phrases: partnership, new stakeholders, and flexibility. We'll kind of wrap it up with those 3 things. I want to genuinely thank each of you for your time, for your expertise. I know the audience appreciates that as well. And I want to thank the audience for taking your time to spend 90 minutes with us today for the final session. So really great things. And my hope is we continue the discussion. This isn't the end of it, but hopefully it'll be just a continuation. And with that, I also just want to note that not only is this the end of our 90-minute session on Asia Pacific, but this is also the end of the 2021 PEER Forum. So we're wrapping up 3 days. We had lots of interesting discussions, lots of interesting panelists, interesting topics on different geographic regions. And just in an effort, and this will be fairly brief, an effort to kind of wrap all of this up, I just want to share 3 things with you. I want to share 2 prompts and then 1 challenge. And the prompts are from previous panelists and previous speakers. The first is from Elizabeth, and she spoke on day 1, and she encouraged us for us, those who attended this event, to begin to see ourselves as a global network of investors in human potential. And specifically, as we think about this discussion, not just any potential, but the extraordinary potential of displaced students. And I think we must begin to see ourselves as united in our efforts, not siloed in these efforts. And I think as noted on that partnership that you mentioned, Barney, we can do so much more together. And then I think to do this is my second prompt from John Sexton, encouraging us to identify, or for those who are attending, to become search engines of talent. I think which for our purpose requires going beyond the usual sources for students, kind of proverbially digging new wells for finding great displaced students. I think IIE, I referenced earlier, is one of these search engines, but we need more to scale our impact. And as John referenced, the geniuses are being left out. Let's have less of that in the future. And I think if we become these search engines, look in places we don't typically look for students, we can make a real difference. And together, united in these efforts, we can do so much more. And this leads me to my last thought, which is really more of a challenge and more action oriented. But I think taking on some of the examples that we've seen from universities like Western Sydney, I want to encourage universities in partnership with NGOs to make an institutional commitment to enroll more displaced students in your degree programs. I want to encourage you to include this goal in your university's overall strategy and make it part of the identity of who the institution is and wants to become. And perhaps this means taking actions like lowering enrollment barriers, being more flexible, as Greg noted, with admissions, documentation, tuition costs, etc. And as noted earlier, on all of these things, I really want to encourage us to continue the discussion. I think these events are so helpful, if nothing more than simply connecting individuals and people and organizations who might not normally engage. And I think there's tremendous value in that. So in summary, just want to say this: let us become a network. Those who've joined these last 3 days, not silos, more powerful together. Let us identify or become search engines of talent, and let us commit to taking quantifiable real action on degree access for displaced students. And with that, with those 3 points that I want to leave you with, I just want to thank all of the attendees who have joined us. I want to thank all of the audience for their time the last 3 days. I know it's not ideal. We want to do this in person, but such are the times that we do these things virtually. But thank you so much for getting up early in the morning, late in the evening, for all the panelists sharing their expertise. I think it's been tremendous. I've learned quite a bit myself. And I want to thank the Catalyst Foundation for the generous support, not only for today, but over many years in the past, done tremendous work, and really your commitment is inspiring. On a final note, and I'll leave you with this, please do not forget to follow IIE on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, our monthly newsletter. And as noted in our first session, IIE will be announcing details soon of a new scholarship program for displaced students. So please stay tuned. We'll send those details in the near future. And with that, I just want to say, everyone have a great day, have a great evening, and thank you again so much. All the best. Take care.